The normalization of horror on eating and being eaten, on aging, decay, and death. There are truths that remain hidden not because they are complex, but because they are unbearable. The horror of existence belongs to this category. It is not concealed. It does not require advanced philosophy to uncover. It unfolds openly, everywhere at all times. And yet it is softened, reframed, aestheticized, and metabolized by language until it becomes tolerable. Not because humanity is naive, but because without this softening, ordinary life would collapse. The world functions only as long as its core mechanism is not seen too clearly. Strip away all metaphors, all comforting narratives, all cultural cosmetics, and what remains is stark. Everything that lives survives by destroying other life. There are no exceptions, only degrees of distance. Even where death appears indirect, it is still the condition of continuation. Life feeds on life. Consciousness itself is tethered to biological systems that must consume, age, deteriorate, and eventually fail. Every organism enters existence already marked for decay. Aging is not an accident. It is the visible signature of the structure. From the first moment, each body is a delayed ruin. Above this stands death. Absolute, unavoidable, and radically unpredictable. Not only that it comes, but that its timing is unknown. This uncertainty is not incidental. It functions like a psychological pressure field. One lives inside it continuously. The effect resembles a death row without schedule. You know the sentence is final, but the clock has no face. It could be decades away. It could be tonight. Age, illness, accident, randomness. Any door may open. This alone would be enough to destabilize the mind. But what makes it especially cruel is that one cannot leave at will. The biological machinery is built around self-preservation. Pain, fear, attachment, instinct, all are hardwired restraints. You are bound to the process even while seeing its nature. You are inside it, without consent. From here emerges the sense of existential captivity, not as metaphor, but as structure. One is placed into a system that demands participation, enforces continuation, and guarantees deterioration. You cannot opt out cleanly. You cannot step aside peacefully. You are carried forward by processes that do not care about meaning. This is why the horror must be normalized. If this were continuously present in awareness, human civilization would not function. People would not plan futures. They would not bring children into the world. They would not dedicate decades to careers, ambitions, or long-term projects. Motivation would evaporate. Social coherence would fracture, so the system generates buffers. Languages evolve that soften brutality. Cultures arise that ritualize decay. Philosophies appear that frame suffering as growth. Religions promise compensation elsewhere. Psychology teaches coping. Art romanticizes transience. Nature is portrayed as beautiful balance instead of organized consumption. This is not conspiracy. It is automatic. The organism, society, and symbolic order cooperate unconsciously to keep the core invisible. Violence becomes nature. Compulsion becomes necessity. Decay becomes cycle. Death becomes transition. These are not lies in a simple sense. They are anesthetics. Without them, the raw structure would be intolerable. From a detached perspective, one might initially be tempted to describe this as impersonal, a closed system, a self-maintaining loop that generates sentient forms, binds them to survival, lets them age, breaks them down, and repeats the process endlessly. But even this is already an interpretation, because the moment religious and especially Gnostic perspectives are allowed into the frame, neutrality dissolves. From that angle, this world does not appear morally indifferent. It appears engineered. Gnostic thought has long suggested that the architecture of this reality does not reflect the highest principle, but a fractured or ignorant creative power, a system born from separation rather than fullness. In this view, suffering is not an accidental byproduct of existence. It is embedded in the design. Here, the endless cycle of consumption, decay, and rebirth is not simply nature doing what nature does. It is the signature of a compromised creation, a closed loop that traps consciousness inside flesh, time, and necessity. Seen this way, the horror is no longer merely impersonal. It becomes systemic cruelty, not cruelty driven by emotion, but cruelty expressed through structure. A world where beings are made sensitive, then forced to harm each other to survive. A world where awareness awakens inside bodies already programmed to deteriorate. A world where attachment is biologically enforced, while loss is guaranteed. From this perspective, existence resembles a cosmic enclosure, consciousness captured in matter, compelled to participate in its own erosion. Religion attempts to soften this by calling it trial, lesson, or divine plan. But the Gnostic lens cuts deeper. It recognizes the pattern itself as the problem. Not a single evil event. The framework. The machine that generates sentient life inside conditions of inevitable suffering. Under this lens, creation no longer looks like a benevolent gift. It looks like captivity. And this is where sentimental language finally fails. Nature stops being sacred. Life stops being inherently good. Existence stops being self-justifying. What remains is mechanism. And once this is truly seen, all inherited meaning systems begin to tremble, because they were built precisely to prevent this view from stabilizing. Temporal captivity, consciousness inside a countdown. Once you stop looking at suffering as a set of unfortunate events and start seeing it as an architectural feature, time becomes the most honest lens. Time is not simply change. It is deterioration with a schedule you cannot read. It is a corridor that only runs in one direction. It does not negotiate. It does not pause for meaning. It does not care how much insight you have, how sincere your love is, or how hard you tried. Everything you touch is already leaving. That is the quiet violence of temporality. It turns even the best moments into future grief in advance. A friendship, a body, a place, a season, a mood. As soon as it appears, it begins its disappearance. You can watch it happening if you look long enough. In the face, in the joints, in the nervous system, in the way desire slowly changes its texture, in the way the mind becomes less elastic, in the way the world accumulates before and after until every memory feels like proof that nothing stays. This is why the death row analogy does not come from melodrama. It comes from accurate perception. The sentence is certain. The execution date is hidden. You live inside that uncertainty like an atmospheric condition. It shapes your choices even when you pretend it doesn't. It makes you rush, cling, bargain, distract yourself, build stories, build projects, build identities, all with the vague hope that if you keep moving, you won't have to feel the stillness underneath. Most people do not consciously think this. They don't need to. Time works directly on the body. It installs urgency without asking permission. It makes you seek comfort. It makes you seek reasons. It makes you seek continuity. And then it removes all three. In that sense, time is not simply a dimension. It is the enforcement arm of the structure. The biochemical leash. How the body enforces participation. Even when you see the machinery, you still have to eat. That simple fact tells you almost everything. Awareness does not float freely. It is tethered. The body is not merely a vehicle. It is a constraint system. It is a leash made of nerves and hormones, tightened by pain, loosened by pleasure, and always pulled in the same direction, continuation. The body recruits you with chemistry. It binds you to the world through fear responses that arrive before thought. It binds you through reward loops that make ordinary life addictive in small doses. It binds you through attachment, which is not merely psychological, but physiological. Your nervous system learns faces, voices, routines, and then treats their absence like threat. It binds you through fatigue and hunger, which reduce philosophy to a minor background noise. It binds you through pain, which can turn the entire cosmos into a single point of suffering. It binds you through sleep, which forces surrender every day. It binds you through libido, which pulls you into the cycle again, often against your own stated worldview. This is why knowing does not liberate. To see the structure is one thing. To be able to step outside it is another. The body is designed to make stepping outside feel impossible, irrational, terrifying, or morally forbidden. It doesn't need a religion to do that. It does it directly. And that directness is what makes the captivity feel so total. You can recognize that the game is cruel and still find yourself playing it, not because you are weak, but because the rules are written into tissue. This is also why people can become angry at themselves for still wanting anything at all. They think desire proves they secretly agree with life. But desire is not a philosophical vote. It is a mechanism. The leash tightens, and the mind learns to call the tension choice. The social mask layer. Why society cannot survive lucidity. This is the part almost nobody talks about honestly, because it exposes something uncomfortable about civilization. Most social life is not organized around truth. It is organized around viability. A society is an arrangement that must keep millions of frightened organisms cooperating. It must keep them waking up, working, reproducing, obeying laws, maintaining routines, and trusting that tomorrow is worth preparing for. It must keep them invested. That investment depends on a fragile psychological condition, the ability to experience life as normal. Not normal in the sense of harmless, but normal in the sense of emotionally manageable. Normal enough to plan. Normal enough to postpone despair. Normal enough to raise children without feeling like you are recruiting them into a slaughterhouse with decorations. So society develops a second skin, a shared language of reassurance. You hear it everywhere, in casual phrases, in polite optimism, in the ritual of, "How are you?" in the way people talk about aging as if it were a dignified story arc rather than a slow dismantling, in the way death is discussed as something that happens to others until it doesn't. This second skin is not optional. It is the membrane that holds the social world together. And here is the crucial point. When someone stops cooperating with that membrane, it does not feel to others like a different opinion. It feels like an existential threat. Not because people are cruel, because their own stability depends on not seeing what you are pointing at. Lucidity is contagious. It does not spread like an argument. It spreads like atmosphere, like temperature. One person speaking too plainly about the structure can change the emotional climate of an entire room. Suddenly, people feel their own mortality. They sense the thinness of the stories they live inside. They feel the abyss underneath the furniture. And then they want to stop that feeling. This is where social correction begins. It rarely appears as open hostility. It arrives as concern, advice, jokes, irritation, moralizing, and subtle distancing. You are invited back into the approved tone. People say things like, "You're overthinking. You're being negative. You need gratitude. You should focus on the good. Life is what you make it. Suffering is a choice. You attract what you dwell on. It's all part of the journey." These are not arguments. They are interventions. They function like social sedatives administered through conversation. Their purpose is not to examine reality. Their purpose is to restore the shared trance. And if you resist, the tone shifts. Your clarity becomes reclassified as pathology, not necessarily in medical language, but socially. You become unstable, too intense, draining, toxic, not good to be around. This is one of the quiet brutalities of honesty. It can make you socially radioactive. A person can be gentle, careful, and restrained, and still be treated as dangerous simply because they refuse to join collective denial. Society rarely punishes truth because truth is immoral. It punishes truth because truth destabilizes. There is an unspoken contract in most relationships. We will not stare at the worst things for too long. We will acknowledge them briefly, then return to the performance of normality. We will grieve, but not excessively. We will mention death, but not in a way that makes lunch impossible. This contract is what allows intimacy to remain comfortable. It is also what makes intimacy fragile, because it depends on editing reality. When you break that contract, you do not merely share information. You alter the emotional climate, and people respond to climate before they respond to content. They may care about you deeply and still recoil, because your clarity forces them to feel what they spend their lives managing away. There is another layer beneath this. Social life is fundamentally future-oriented. Plans, goals, careers, vacations, retirement, improvement. Even when people claim they reject progress narratives, their actions betray faith in tomorrow. Action itself is a bet on continuation. If you remove that bet, the entire motivational economy begins to wobble. The person who no longer believes in arrival threatens the structure simply by existing, not by preaching, by presence, because their stance implies that all this striving may not be sacred, may not be meaningful, may not pay off. That implication is intolerable to a system built on striving. So the system defends itself. It isolates the lucid. It pressures them to soften their language. It reframes their insight as mood. It encourages them to heal back into participation. This is why people are allowed to be sad but not allowed to be lucid. Sadness can be comforted. Lucidity changes the terms of life. Despair is treated as temporary. Clarity is treated as dangerous. And slowly, many people learn to split themselves. They become bilingual, outwardly functional, inwardly unconvinced. They speak the language of society in public and the language of truth in private. They learn when to be silent. They learn how to translate themselves downward. They learn which thoughts are socially survivable and which must be carried alone. This is not hypocrisy. It is adaptation. But it produces a specific loneliness, not the loneliness of having nobody, but the loneliness of not being able to fully speak inside the world you inhabit. The loneliness of watching others laugh while feeling the floor beneath the laughter. This is where normalization becomes truly ruthless. The system does not only force you to endure the horror, it pressures you to pretend that the horror is not horror. It asks you to smile with a guillotine in the background.